Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to our first webinar in our webinar series called ChatGPT for Science. So glad that you've joined us today. We'll give people just another moment here to dial in. So if you haven't yet, feel free to grab yourself a cup of coffee, tea, or if it's late afternoon for you, a beverage of your choice. Won't specify. See, Chris is already all covered. Okay, welcome, everyone. I think we're good to get started here. So if you've just joined, welcome again to this webinar, first part of the series, ChatGPT for Science. Today, specifically, we're exploring the critical theme of navigating quality control in ChatGPT, the power of research and citations. My name is Julia Heesen. I'm your moderator for today, as you probably already tell, and I'm happy to have you join us what promises to be a thought-provoking discussion on the interplay between generative AI, research publications, and the pivotal role of citations in ensuring the credibility of large language models. Today's presenters are Chris Bendel. He's the Director of Product Strategy at Research Solutions, and Josh Nicholson, Chief Strategy Officer at Research Solutions, as well as the co-founder of Cite. Both bring a wealth of knowledge and insight into the application of citations in quality control and the pursuit of building trust in AI-driven outputs. So welcome to the webinar, Josh and Chris.
Great to be here.
Thanks.
So as always, I think you've been on enough webinars already. A couple of quick housekeeping items. You're all in listen mode, so you don't have to worry about background noise or your cameras. Of course, everything is turned off. We do have the chat enabled, so if you have any questions, if it's more of a technical sort, feel free to just add them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. And then we also have Q&A. So on Zoom below, if you click on Q&A, we have that enabled, and we have dedicated time at the end of the webinar to answer all of your questions. I hope all of them, as many as we get to. So definitely, as soon as they come up, feel free to add them. Just know that we'll be saving them towards the end of the presentation today. And then last thing here is the session is being recorded, and I will be sending out the webinar recording to all of you about an hour or two after the webinar is over. So you can share that with your colleagues, reshare any part, rewatch it. So that's totally up to you. You will all receive a copy of it. Okay, Chris, with that being said, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julia. Yeah, I'm going to provide a little bit of introduction, a little bit of context. We're going to look at two polls to hear from you as well. Before handing over to Josh, and then I'll be following up at the end to help answer your questions. Just a little bit to Research Solutions. We have been around since 2006. For much of that time, we've focused on providing access to scholarly content, so especially scientific journal content, to lots of different types of organizations, many of the world's universities, but also many of the world's research-intensive companies and institutions. More recently, we've been focusing on, looking beyond, just providing access to content, to understanding how our users are making use of content in different ways, and really understanding and looking at the research workflow to see how we can develop additional solutions and help to our users to achieve more of the jobs that they need to do and address some of the challenges that they have along the way. So yeah, for this, we're focused around our mission, which is to advance the world's knowledge by simplifying research. So that brings us to our first poll. And today we're talking about generative AI. We're talking about the implications that generative AI have, or the potential and opportunities they have for us in applying them to the scientific research process. But of course, also there are some other issues that we need to think about when using generative AI applications. But first of all, just to hear from you, what are the generative AI applications you have been using in the recent past? So you can enter just free text here in the box, and then yeah, we'll be creating a word cloud from that. Yeah. I see we have some also in the chat. ChatGPT was mentioned, for instance.
Thanks everyone for participating. I see so many answers coming through. This is awesome.
I thought there was no participants until I could see the participant number.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, I think we've got as many responses as we can. Let's end this poll here.
And then, here the results are coming. No, it's a box. Where do we see the results? Sorry.
Kind of pulled up a new window here.
Okay.
I'll share it in a few just to get these organized.
Okay.
All
We'll
right.
move to the next one.
So we'll look at those in a moment. So then we can look at the second poll. And you've all had a chance to use generative AI applications, and there's been a lot of discussion and experimentation. So many of you are probably also aware of some of the issues, not only in terms of the opportunities, but also potential risks and challenges of using generative AI. And we're going to talk quite a lot about this today. So this question is really focused on that, and that is, how concerned are you about the accuracy of generative AI output?
Okay, let's look at the results here. These I can share directly with the poll. Here you are.
All right. So how concerned are you about the accuracy of generative AI outputs? Some are 0. So I think this is 0 was not too concerned, and 8
No,
was
very concerned.
very
Zero is
concerned
very
was
concerned.
0. Okay. So yeah, 28% are very concerned. In fact, when we look at the top 3, this accounts for, close to or a bit more than half of the people. So yeah, a lot of you are very concerned about the outputs of generative AI. We're going to dive quite a bit into, what these potential inaccuracies are, and potentially the different ways we can look at providing solutions to that as well. Do we have the word cloud as well? Because I wasn't able to bring it up myself.
Yep, there's a new URL. So let me just present a few of the options here. I don't want to steal a screen, but
yeah, okay.
Many say ChatGPT. We have a few saying Grammarly, Perplexity, Cite, Stable Cascade, Consensus, again, Perplexity, Elicit, Copilot, Jenny AI, Claude, Copilot, GPT 4.0, Gemini, SciSpace, Elicit Consensus.
Yeah, so that represents quite a lot of the existing tools which are out there. Of course, there are the more general tools such as Gemini and Claude, Perplexity, and ChatGPT, but also some more specific applications focused on scientific information were listed there, such as Elicit and SciSpace, etc. And of course, Cite, which we'll be talking about quite a bit today. So moving on, and handing over to Josh to talk about introducing you not only to Cite, but really to the topic of the day, and how to navigate the use of LLMs and generative AI, and how to make sure, what are some of the strategies we can employ to ensure the types of results that we're getting can be more trusted and transparent.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Julia, and thanks everyone for joining. I would admit that I was not shy at all. Now I see 120 people listening to me, so I'll try not to touch my face too much. So today I do want to talk a little bit about, kind of information overload, how that's affected us through the course of decades, how citations have helped in many cases, and how I think they will continue to help, in the future and in today's world. And so I'm going to talk, broadly about information on the web and new technological advances. And then I'll talk a little bit about, why we started Cite, why we focused on citations, and how we think they can be useful again, in today's new, generative AI world. And so, there was a few polls. This is not a poll. It's really kind of meant as a rhetorical question, but, are the challenges of generative AI as they relate to trust new, right? Generative AI is, of course, new, highly impactful. It's really affecting, almost everything you can think of. But we've had kind of similarities where there's been these big technological leaps, and we've had big technological challenges, right? And so I would argue this challenge of trust going back from the first printing press, all the way forward to today is remains pretty much, paramount. And so we need to make sure whatever medium it is, a book or a web, generative AI is something that we can trust, something that we can use, right? And that's important for societal standards, important for research, important for the adoption of these new technologies and mediums of communication. And so in the early 90s, and I had, the privilege of kind of being able to play with some of these search tools, there was something new, right? There was a new web, there was massive amounts of online literature, new pages relating to dogs, to movies, anything you could think of, right? We go from movie phone to looking up movies on the web. And you might remember Alta Vista, OlliWeb. I think there was one that had, cute little spider. And so there was a challenge, right? This is easy information at your fingertips exploding, right? How do we know what is right? How do we know what to trust? How do we know what to go for? And so, early on, there was no clear answer. There was many different ways of navigating through the literature. And so, we had something that wasn't Ask ChatGPT, it was Ask Jeeves, right? And again, you could put in a prompt and it would help to try and find you answers. And so there's a lot of similarities, I would say, to the early days of the web as there are to where we are today with ChatGPT and other LLMs that were mentioned in the poll. So this paper, and I'll reveal the title a bit later, came out, to talk about this, right? The World Wide Web creates many new challenges for information retrieval. It is very large and heterogeneous. Current estimates are that there are over 150 million web pages with a doubling life of less than 1 year. Importantly, the web pages are extremely diverse, ranging from what is Joe having for lunch today to journal information, right? And in addition to these major challenges, search engines on the web must also contend with inexperienced users and pages engineered to manipulate search engine ranking function. And so this was the challenge in 1998. I would say a lot of these challenges are very similar to where we are today, right? There are so many easy tools. There are deep fakes. There is content that looks perfect grammatically, but can be wildly wrong, right? And so how do we contend with this? How do we rank and organize the LLMs? And so, similarly to the early days of the web, I would also say, we have some information sources which we kind of take for granted, or at least I personally take for granted now, but are pretty amazing, right? We have a crowdsourced encyclopedia, right? And it generally works, right? You are able to look up content on almost anything, and you will find relevant information backed by sources where you can more or less trust it, right? And that, to me, if you take a step back, is pretty amazing, right? There are people all across the world. You can sign up, you can edit it, and somehow it doesn't deteriorate into chaos. And so again, these challenges of building out trust, and you'll see the recurrent theme soon, are things that we've had to deal with new technologies and new ways of communicating information. And so here, comes, to the point of how can we trust ChatGPT, right? Very easy to use, very powerful, very flexible. It's deployed in a lot of different ways. So maybe, not even just ChatGPT, but chat bots, right? LLMs. How can we use Perplexity? How can we use Gemini? How can we use Cite? How can we use any of these LLMs? And not just text, but also images, etc. And so these are, what we're grappling with as a society today, as university librarians, as researchers, as students, as corporations, as companies. And, again, I think it will permeate basically everything in today's culture. Maybe, in some places it's a bit more scary than others. And so, ultimately, how do we know what to trust? And so the theme, that I'm going to start to bring, as you might say, could have guessed from the name of the company and what we do, is that citations play a crucial role, right? And so in this page, or in this paper from 1998, they discuss PageRank, PageRank ultimately, set apart Google from others, and it was influenced very strongly by citation ranking, right? Directly from journal citations. And so the early days of Web of Science and journal citations strongly influenced how we deal with the web, right? Leading to Google. And so ultimately, you can see early days where they would show the PageRank. Here is a very simple schematic looking at the PageRank, generally looking at, the number of backlinks, right? So it's trying to not say, hey, all web pages are created the same. Some are actually higher quality than others. And we can do this in this way that scales systematically to look at backlinks and how those backlinks of higher rated pages relate to other pages. Obviously, this is an oversimplification of where it is today, and there's been many changes and lots of money to figure out exactly how these things are going. But it is, important, more than ever, right? How do we find what is right? And I think, LLMs and the web are in contention in some cases, where some people are finding better answers, than what they might find on Google. And so similar to the early days of the web, Wikipedia, I think, really truly only works because there are sources, right? There are citations. And so you can look at the claims that were made, you can hover over, and then you can go directly to the source of information where that claim can be verified. And so allowing us to trust but verify through citations is a critical part, not just of scientific communication, but from things that we use every day, Google, Wikipedia, etc. And so can citations help with LLMs? And again, maybe this is not like a real question, but more of a rhetorical question, and I would say yes. And where is it helping today? And so here we heard the answer, Gemini. You can see again, this is a plain language question. What are the causes of misinformation? And then there's an answer. And this answer has these little footnotes where if you open them, pulls up a citation. In this case, it's pulling up an open access article from PubMed, and it's showing even an excerpt or a snippet, allowing you to verify that, right? Here's the article that says the spread of misinformation online and other mediums is a complex issue with multiple contributing factors. And so having these citations, I think, is a crucial part for the adoption of these tools. If not, it might be right. It might make sense, right? From your understanding, but really you need a way to kind of verify this and to look at this, especially if the claims are not kind of these obvious ones, but get into specific numbers, get into specific results, etc. Another one brought up, in that
Just
poll is Copilot.
just a
Yep.
second. We had a question, Josh, about what are large language models or LLMs. So just to make sure that everyone's aware, when we kind of talk interchangeably between generative AI and large language models. So the actual AI model behind ChatGPT, for instance, is a so-called large language model. It's essentially a very sophisticated machine learning algorithm, which has been fed huge amounts of content, most of the content on the web, for instance, and from that has been able to learn to predict and generate text, not consumes those texts and then is able to predict what is going to be the next most relevant or most likely words if you put in a certain input, and thereby through this continuous learning process, it's able to actually generate text which we can then consume and for us understandable in ways that we would expect it to be understandable. But through consuming all this information, having access to it, it is now also very useful to help us find information as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And here, as I've shown, these are the outputs of these LLMs, right? Powering Copilot, powering, Gemini are LLMs. They have different interfaces and different UI, UX, but behind the scenes is an LLM output, the generative artificial intelligence. And so, here is again, Copilot, similar to Gemini. You ask a question, it gives you a response. And then crucially, it too is pulling from the web, right? And from journal articles or from news articles to allow you to start to say, okay, I can trust that, right? Here is something that I can use to look at to see if that is right or wrong. Because these things are not perfect, right? And so here, again, you get to scroll in and look deeper at that. Perplexity, similar, you ask a question, what are the causes of misinformation? It gives an answer, and it also gives sources. It even puts sources ahead of the answer, which I think, is interesting because they're showing this is how important sources are to the adoption of LLMs, to the adoption of generative AI. If you can't verify it, you really can't trust it. And in research area, that's pretty much a blocker. And so to me, citations, maybe they're not the new black, but they've always been very important, right? They're mentioned in the page that, introduced PageRank that made Google Google. And today you see them kind of everywhere, right? They're becoming more prominent on the web, I would say, not less. And so we have focused on citations for a long time. We created Cite. We launched it back in 2018, but we actually started thinking about citations in 2012. And why did we think about citations? So I am a cell biologist by training. I finished a PhD back in 2015. And the reason that we started Cite was around trust, around information overload, around veracity, around reproducibility. And so this paper came out toward the end of my PhD. Some of you might have seen this before and might know exactly what is being said. It was reported by two senior researchers at Amgen. And what they report in this commentary, which is a commentary because it itself is hard to reproduce, is that over the course of 10 years, validating major cancer studies in-house to take through the drug development program, more often than not, it failed, right? And it failed pretty dramatically. About 90% of the times, they couldn't validate major papers coming from major journals. This was less flashy, but also seen in another Nature paper looking across different disease indications where the numbers were still pretty shocking. But again, there was these challenges of being able to reproduce the claims of published literature. And so this got us thinking and said, that's a problem, right? Behind these clinical trials, behind drugs are people suffering, people, needing therapies. There are massive amounts of money, billions of dollars being spent on drug development, billions of dollars being spent, through taxpayer money, through the NIH every year. I think it's about 40 billion per year. And so we want, our research to be trustworthy so that we can build products off of it, so that we can build technologies off of it, so that we can build and inform better policies, whether those are financial policies, social policies, city planning, really anything you can think about, research informs. And so we wrote a paper back in 2014, me and my co-founder, Yuri Lazipnik, who was a professor at Yale a professor at Cold Spring Harbor for 20 years and then moved over to Yale. And in this paper is basically the idea behind Cite. And that is that not all citations are the same. We should not treat them as if they are all the same. So almost like that PageRank idea, but really addressed around veracity and reproducibility. And so in this paper, we suggest, hey, instead of just looking at the pure count of citations, what if we looked at and introduced this R factor? We don't call it an R factor anymore. In fact, we barely use kind of this metric, but the metric, is what was looking at a different type of citations. And here it's looking at a metric that indicates whether a report or its conclusions have been verified, right? So can we build out a way where we can look at, hey, this paper has been reproduced or not, and make that easy to see for readers, for anyone, interested in that research. And so very early on, here is a prototype of the R factor. And what you can see is that it's not wildly different from where Cite is today, although it is at the same time. What it shows is a PubMed ID of a paper. I can't actually even remember what that paper is, but this is an early screenshot. And what we show is, hey, here is the citation context, which increasingly has become, I would say, the biggest value of Cite, not the classifications, but the context. And so here is the citation context of this citing article or of these multiple citing articles. And so you, as a human, can now read through these different citation contexts and see, are any of these authors of subsequent research challenging the research? Are they supporting it? Is this something that has even been tested, or are there differences, or how is this being used? And the point I'm trying to make here is that there are dozens and dozens of reasons for citing an article, but for decades, we have treated citations as if they're all the same, and they're not, right? They are not flat list of citations. They can appear in the introduction section, the method section, the results section. They can appear 5 times throughout the articles, not just once, as you're seeing here. And so this aim of looking at citations and trying to improve them has been kind of our North Star since 2014, and has been in response to growing concerns around trust and reproducibility and veracity, primarily with research articles, but as I'll show later, even with large language models and ChatGPT and generative AI. And so what does cite look like today? What do smart citations mean? What is a next generation citation? And so for maybe, many of you who are on this call, you might have seen something like this. You might know exactly what I'm talking about, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I want to show the world kind of as it exists without cite, and then how that's looked through traditional citation counts, and then through the lens of cite, and how that might change how we interpret and trust research. And so here is actually the main study coming out of my PhD. There you can see I am. I did my PhD at Virginia Tech. We collaborated with the hospital in Portugal, as well as the lab at the NIH. We published in eLife, which has done a lot of experimentation in how they publish and review things. You can see it's been viewed over 12,000 times. It's been cited 69 times. And so I point out all these things because these are what we look at, right? It's almost like the brand of the food that we buy at the grocery store, or the brand of the fashion, right? We want to understand, do I trust this? Do I know this? Is this something that, I understand and can kind of, again, trust? So if you click through to the number of citations, and apologies for picking on Scopus, but I don't think they'll mind, you'll see a traditional citation index. So whether it's a Scopus, a Web of Science, a Dimensions, a Crossref, and they're more or less going to show you the same thing, right? And that is a list of citing articles, right? So here are 66 documents citing this. You can see that this paper is open access. They cite it. Again, you can see here's a paper. It's published in this journal. It is also citing this article of interest. What these traditional citation indices are missing is the context, right? You're not knowing why or how this article is citing it. Yes, of course, you can open 66 different documents to see that information, but that just becomes totally impractical at higher numbers, right? No one is opening 66 different articles to see what they've said about your one article of interest. And that, to me, is a big missed opportunity, because behind each of these citations could be 5 years worth of work. Maybe a PhD student's entire thesis is this paper. There could be very valuable interpretations, discussions, criticism, supporting evidence, competing evidence, etc. And so we're trying to move this metric, and really that's why I talk less about metrics. We're trying to move this metric of a high citation count into really like an information source that allows you to build out and trust research articles, to build out and trust research topics, researchers, journals, everything that citations impact, which is basically kind of everything in research, right? And actually, one of my favorite op-eds is called Cream, which is Citations Rule Everything Around Me, which is a play on the Wu-Tang album Cash Rules Everything Around Me. And so I'd encourage people to read that, and it was published by the editor of Matter at a Cell journal. And so here's the world with cite, right? Here's the difference of cite. Yes, we're showing the same metadata, title, author's abstract. We do show a list of citing articles. We are a citation index at the core of it. But what is powerful is that we go into the full text of the scholarly document and extract out these citation statements. So you're able to see, here's an article. It makes a citation to my work in the results section, and here's exactly what it says. It says, in agreement with previous work, cites Nicholson et al., and then says the trisomic clone showed similar aberrations, albeit to a lesser extent, supplemental figure S2B. So they're saying they agree with the previous work. They're indicating that there's evidence. Here's where you can go find that evidence in this figure in the supplement. And so this excerpt, these three sentences, the target sentence, the sentence before it, and the sentence after it, where we got the citation or the excerpt from, the results section, and then the classification, which we have done through a deep learning model, is really what we mean by a smart citation collectively, right? So you're able to see how, why an article has been cited. And that is, pretty simple to understand, right? It's just showing an excerpt and showing you the how and the why. And so again, I would say that is a lot more digestible. You can now see the conversation happening amongst these papers. You can easily see that there's a paper supporting this, and you can do that, in a matter of like seconds versus a matter of hours or days if you're talking about dozens or hundreds of citations. And so this is and has been our core focus for really 6 years, and really continues to this day. And so to get to this, it might seem simple. Let's just show 3 sentences from the citing article, but there's some big barriers, right? And of course, we're not the first to have this idea. And so the first big barrier is that you need access to the full text of literature, right? There's no one place where you can go download every single full text of an article. And so we have spent significant time and energy partnering directly with publishers, not as much time updating this graph because it is now severely out of date. But this is just aimed at showing you that we're partnering directly with a diversity of publishers across all different disciplines to extract out and analyze these citation statements at scale. And so we're now actually, I think, at 1.3 or 1.4 billion citation statements extracted from the literature. We've analyzed 60 million PDFs, which brings me to the second challenge. And that is, once you have the license and the right to do this, which is a big hurdle, the next challenge is a technical one. So here is on the right side a view of what this looks like, right? So here's a PDF. I forget which journal this is coming from. This is actually what our tool looks like. And so here it's highlighting this is an in-text citation, et cetera. Some cases you can see it actually misses some, right? There's another one, it missed that, but it captures these. And so it's not perfect, but we are digesting, again, 60 million plus PDFs. These PDFs have thousands of different reference styles. And so that's annoying for us as authors. It's also a challenge for our machines to extract this information out. PDFs can be 2-column, they can be single column, they can be OCR'd. There are pictures of, manuscripts from 1665 that we have ran through, right? And that's through our indexing agreement with the Royal Societies. And so there's really a big challenge technically of extracting out this information. And this is why we've been Cite.ai, since day one, not just Cite.ai, since there's now chatbots and we can build on top of those. And so here, we use a lot of machine learning, natural language processing to identify that Tang et al. Is a correct in-text citation, to match that to the correct reference in the reference section, to take that string of information, which again varies from journal to journal or year to year, and match that against metadata from Crossref or DataCite, which are our gold standards of metadata. We then have this deep learning model that looks at the citation statements and will say, is this presenting supporting or contrasting evidence to the cited claim? And the way that we developed that was to basically annotate 40,000 different citation statements where at least 2 different researchers had to agree upon that they could read this without any other metadata, but just a snippet saying, okay, we can tell that this is supporting and that there's evidence or analyses, or that they're showing a difference and that there's evidence and analyses. That deep learning model has been trained, based on that, and is necessary, again, because we're talking about 1 billion plus of these citation statements. It's just too much for humans to do. And so the timing for us to be able to do this is pretty lucky, right? We could get started on open access content only to prove out this prototype. We could start to talk to the publishers, to work with them. And then the deep learning models were not developed by us in-house, right? We built up the training data, but those started to emerge right as we had started Cite, which became crucial to actually building out this next generation citation index. And so I've talked to you in detail about how we built Cite, but we've also published a paper on this, again, building out that trust and allowing you to see how this works. And I think that's important going forward, especially as we utilize AI and there's different AI tool builders, is to be as clear as we can how tools are built, right? What are the limitations? How precise are they? What is the recall? And this is actually an area where I think it shouldn't just be tool builders saying, here's how we built the tools. It should be researchers themselves doing bibliometric studies, looking at the veracity of these things, looking at the implications of generative AI. And I think that's, a personal area as well as a professional area of interest, coming forward, starting to read, the research on this, because again, we got into this because we care a lot about research and we think it's extremely valuable. So we now work directly with publishers to display this information on the version of record. So here's what it looks like on Wiley. There's a variety of different implementations, but they're more or less showing you these different numbers, right? Supporting citations, contrasting citations, mentioning citations. Some publishers will also choose not to show it in this way, but they'll show by sections, which again is a diversity and nuance that you're otherwise missing in traditional citations. Here it is on American Physiological Society. Again, a slight difference. PNAS, the National Academy of Science Journal, and again, just a slight difference there. And so again, showing you that our work on trying to improve the veracity and trust in literature has been ongoing for the course of 6 years, but really probably a decade, because we've been thinking about it since 2014, and we think is important. And so in comes ChatGPT, in comes LLMs. We've talked about these. They're very easy to use. They're free to use in many cases. You can just put in a prompt. That prompt can be wildly ridiculous. It can be very serious, and it's going to give you a response. Some of these responses are pretty much right. Some, though, are wildly wrong. And how do we differentiate those? How do we know which is something we can rely upon, especially if it's a critical decision? How do we know what is totally wrong, and kind of this amalgamation or Frankenstein of the web that's been gobbled up into this complex machine? And so here's a researcher on the left side talking about ChatGPT and describing their experience. They asked ChatGPT for a bibliography, and JAMA is a real journal, of course. Some of these are real authors. It even has a DOI, but these are not actual articles. You can't open this, right? You can't read this article. They don't resolve, they don't open. They have these fragments of things that are right, but it's not an actual article that you can open. And so on the right side is kind of the funny way of showing that, and that is that, ChatGPT is hallucinating, making things up, right? It's doing its best, but again, there's a big challenge here with trust. And to me, this is a non-starter if you're going to use LLMs for anything in research, but really for anything so long as it's not kind of funny. And I think that's why you see chatbots having footnotes, having citations, having references, having sources, whatever you want to call them, because I think that's the important part for adopting this at scale. And so we think LLMs, chatbots, citation needed, just as Wikipedia needed citations, so too do LLMs. And I think they'll become increasingly important through the adoption and design of the tools as we start to see them. And so we found ourselves, again, at a pretty fortunate place, right? We were a small group of researchers building a company to try to help the research community do better research and understand what to trust and what not to. And so we had spent, again, a lot of time getting access, a lot of time building out these next generation citations. And with that, we said, what can we do here, right? And so we applied our next generation citations to LLMs to provide something that is not 100% trustworthy, but gets you a lot more close to that way of saying, okay, I can trust this. And we launched Cite Assistant, right? And so Cite has many different use cases. You can look up citation reports, as I've shown. You can look up search. You can search through the full text of the literature and see these little snippets. You can look up journal dashboards, institution dashboards, all these different things that you expect from a traditional search and discovery database. Cite Assistant really is at the bleeding edge of the generative AI and all these different tools that were mentioned earlier in the poll. And so Cite Assistant allows you to put in a question in plain language. It will give you a response, directly like ChatGPT or these other ones. But what it's going to do is give you real references that you can click through and that you yourself can see, okay, it's not enough to say it's in this reference, but has that reference been supported? Has that reference been challenged, right? Is it a systematic review? Is it a clinical trial? Is it, a book chapter? Is it a preprint? And so we've designed Cite, and I really should have had another slide, to give you this control that allows you to look at, how and why this output's being cited, right? So we're using, and Chris can speak more to this probably more eloquently, retrieval augmented generation, right? And so we are really retrieving, through a search strategy, the relevant literature, ranking it, and then generating this output. So grounding it in the literature, giving you real references, and then from a UI perspective, allowing you to see, here's what the human said, here's what the machine said. Is that right? Can I trust that? And so making it easy for you to kind of validate and trust, and to build out this trust, right? Both from our side, doing as much as we can automatically through semantic matching, et cetera, but also from your side to control that and to say, hey, I want to build in only systematic reviews to answer this, or I want to run a systematic search and restrict it to those group of articles. And so under settings, there's a lot of different functionalities that you can do. You can go there and try this. You can choose the year window that you want. So maybe you say, okay, that's 2010. I want newer stuff. So let me only look at articles that are 2020 onwards. Again, you can look at different article types. You can restrict down to journal types, groups of articles, which we call dashboards. And then you can, again, choose to wait and really kind of do a lot of these different things. And so this is, still a chat interface. We do have a table structure interface, and we're working actually diligently to get out some advances on that. So allowing you to use AI to, again, do some data extraction and understanding of the literature, right? Better way to kind of understand and utilize the literature. But again, tying it all back to citations, and I would say the citation context and smart citations collectively. And so hopefully I've rambled on long enough to where there's enough good questions and feedback. But before turning that over and opening that up, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and cite previous work on this space. And so here is Eugene Garfield, who I actually got to speak to back in 2014 on the phone, because again, we didn't even think we could build Cite. We said, Thomson Reuters, Web of Science, you should do this. And so here he is in 1964. And to me, this is quite remarkable how prescient he is, because he says, and I'm going to read the full thing. However, it is interesting to speculate whether transformational or other automatic analysis of such a paragraph could produce a useful additional marker, right? So could we do an automatic analysis of the paragraph to have a marker, which would describe briefly the kind of relationship that exists between the citing and citing document? A summarization, an analysis, AI. He says these markers would appear in the published citation index along with the usual citation data. In the case of the paragraph above, for example, critique or one of several other terse statements like Mr. X is wrong, data spurious, conclusions wrong, calamity for mankind might be appropriate. The intelligent machine, and he uses that, again, in the 60s, would examine a new document and generate a critical statement such as rather poor paper. And so very presciently, he saw citations aren't all the same. We should start to qualify these things. We should start to look at these. We should apply markers and go beyond that. And so I think, the technology just wasn't there to do it. I do think it is there now. And I think citations will continue to play a crucial role going forward. And so I will stop there. I'll turn it over to Julia. She can talk a little bit about, an upcoming webinar, and then we can open it up for some questions.
Thank you so much, Josh. Yeah, so you might already know, you might have already signed up, but this is a two-part webinar series. So in 2 weeks' time, it's on November 21st. Send a link in the chat here. If you have it, you can still sign up for the second part. It'll be slightly more technical. So it'll be a technical exploration specifically of Site Assistant. So if you want to learn more about Site Assistant, I definitely encourage you to sign up for that. And then I'll be happy to see you in about 2 weeks' time for that one. And then one other brief thing here. On the next one. If you like what you saw and heard about Cite or Site Assistant today, I'm adding another link. Definitely feel free to reach out if you have, we'll be answering questions here in just a moment, but if you have any specific use case you'd like to discuss, invite more people to a call, happy to organize a demo. Also, we have trials, so definitely feel free to reach out with that same link, and we'd be happy to get that set up for you or your team, the organization as well. Okay, now I see questions ready here. Chris, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to start with a few things from the webinar chat. Yeah, someone actually remembered the page with the spider, web crawler spider, apparently it was called. We already talked a little bit about what LLMs are, but there was a question about, maybe we've covered it quite a lot, but how do you define the term citation statement? What is the definition of citation statements?
Yeah, it's effectively a sentence, right? Extracted from the full text of an article where the citation appears at the end, right? So as you're writing a manuscript, you will write sentences, many sentences. Some of those sentences need citations so you can back up your claim or your assertion. And so we're calling those sentences with the citations a citation statement. And then again, there's a citation statement, the sentence before it, the sentence after it. We often call that citation context. Sometimes we call them snippets, extracts. There's a variety of different ways, but it's really sentences with citations in it.
Okay. There was a question around, so thinking back to the early days and the R factor, whether this was meant to be or refers to relative citation ratio.
It does not refer to relative citation ratio. And so I think there are field-weighted citation ratios that are looking at citation counts weighted by different disciplines, so research disciplines. So again, from physics to social sciences, there's different ways of citing things, right? And so there's different measures of count. Some places are very highly cited, other ones are less citations, smaller field. And so people have developed different ways of looking at citations, such as relative citation ratio, which will take into account the time, field-weighted citation ratio, which will take into account the disciplines. But again, they're treating citations still pretty much as the same, right? Whether your field-weighted citation ratio is 10 or 100, those are still counting the citations. And so we wanted to move beyond, I would say this is an open access citation versus a subscription-based citation, which are different, but, directly showing actually the context, the meaning, the ontology, right? And there are literature on this, citation ontologies that show dozens of different reasons for citing it. We don't show all of them, right? And I think that's a room for us to expand. We chose to focus on supporting and contrasting evidence, again, in response to concerns around trust and veracity and reproducibility. But it would certainly be useful to see many other reasons for citations. And again, there's no sophisticated deep learning behind saying this is an introduction section citation versus a method section citation, but those are very different types and ways of citing an article. And so again, there are a lot of different ways and nuances and rich information and reasons for citing an article. And we want to make that, easy for you to digest and understand and use.
All right. The next question is about being able to compare with other journal rankings. So have we considered integrating with recognized journal rankings like the Australian Dean List, the Academic Journal Guide, ABS list, the Financial Times 50 list, and whether it would then be possible to search just within those lists within Cite.
Yeah, so we do have Cite. So the R factor has effectively become the Cite index. We don't expose that on the article level. We do have journal dashboards for virtually any journal, and you can see broken down by disciplines where does this journal sit within that discipline? Does it have a high Cite index or a low Cite index? We have done also some initial analysis looking at Cite index versus impact factor to see if there's a relationship or not. But we've only kind of done this, I would say, on the side, right? And to me, these are full research projects. And so, candidly, we just don't have a lot of time to do that. I think it's fascinating and interesting, and we do share our data and make it available with researchers so that they can do these bibliometric analyses, comparing, the Cite index to other ones. And so we are working directly with groups, actually one that you mentioned, and there should be a piece coming out tomorrow on it, and then directly with researchers to look at all these different things, right? What does this mean, right? Does this change how we should look at journal rankings? Does this change how we should look at institutional rankings? And I don't have all the answers, right? These are, empirical questions that we need to analyze, we need to study on, and we need to work with the community to come to these answers. And so we do look at them. Some of these rankings and whatnot are pretty close, though. And so in terms of building them into the product, it's sometimes easier said than done. Like sometimes you can't do that, right? Because they don't make that data available. And in other cases, we're pushing back on it, right? We think the impact factor has long been the only way to look at a journal, and we need multiple ways, right? We need to start to not just look at the quantity, but also the quality and the types of citations. And so, again, we want to have some cultural change as well as these technological changes that, happen with our citations.
Okay, cool. We spoke a little bit there's two kind of related questions here, and we've talked a little bit about that already. One was, what is the source of the full text, and what is the percentage of non-open access studies? So we did provide some details during the presentation. We have direct agreements with publishers for them to provide us with the content and the right to mine that content for the purposes of creating Cite and the Cite index. And we are continuously expanding those agreements to add more and more publishers to this service. When it comes to percentages of non-open access studies, I think generally the key estimate at the moment is that when it comes to the total amount of content, we're looking at well north of around 60%. When it comes to just non-open access studies, I'm not sure if we have a number on that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say on that is most of Cite's database is actually subscription-based articles. And so we naturally use open access content, but because we have so many relationships, we have more subscription-based snippets from subscription-based content than otherwise. The other thing I think worth emphasizing is that we don't have every single full text article in the world, as Chris just mentioned. That'll be hard, as you can appreciate. We do have every metadata record in every reference, right? So we're not missing anything in terms of traditional citations. And that is an important kind of stopgap, if you will. So if you look at an article, it has 100 citations, we might have 100 contexts for all those citations, or maybe 150, because again, sometimes citation statements can appear multiple times in a paper. But in some cases, maybe we only have 75 citation statements, and then we have 25 traditional citations. And so you're not missing anything with Cite. Ideally, we would have citation context for everything. But that is, I'd say the big advantage of Cite across these different chatbots and LLMs and citation indices is that we spent 6 years signing indexing agreements, getting access to the full text, working with publishers to build this. And that, can improve how you're using these things, right? And so even the Geminis, the Perplexities, the open AIs that have massive and massive and massive amounts of money, they don't have the ability through smart citations or partnerships with publishers to look at subscription-based literature. And I think that's important for researchers if you actually care about, getting the right answer or utilizing this information in a less biased way.
Do we also extract citations from footnotes?
We do in some cases. Again, in that paper that I referred to, there will be a discussion, I think, on footnotes specifically. But there's a challenge, right? There's footnotes. There are references with names in it. There's references with years in it. Sometimes there's superscript, subscript, parentheticals, brackets. There are so many different ways of citing an article. And so there's a lot of challenges on the machine learning. We do report our numbers, like roughly how good we are extracting this information out. Also, if you go back, we are extracting citation statements from PDFs that is even remarkable to me, from 1800s, right? And again, that's through Royal Society. It doesn't look perfect, because again, it's an OCR PDF, but we're able to do this at scale pretty reliably. And in that article that I shared early on in the talk, we report these numbers directly and talk about all the limitations, challenges, et cetera.
Kind of related to this topic, there's a question: what percentage of references is missed during automated extraction? In your paper, a rather high number of around 30% is mentioned in the case the full text is only available as PDF. Has this changed over time? And related to that, what is the distribution of full text indexed by Cite or available as PDF versus other formats, I guess, like XML?
There's a couple questions in there. So we have continuously improved the pipeline. With that said, we're not redoing the ingestion, if you will, of PDFs all the time, right? It's costly. We've also optimized it to this point where it's quite good. I do think there will probably be some bigger improvements. And then, yes, we will reprocess articles and extract out more citation statements. I think the key thing here is if we miss a citation statement from that, we still have a traditional citation, right? So you're not missing anything per se, especially if you compare it to other citation indices where there's zero context. But, ideally we would have that. And so that's important to understand. But again, you can see when it's missed, right? Directly in the user interface, you can see here is the citation statements. This one doesn't have it. Other limitations, of course, you can refute an article and it doesn't appear in that snippet, right? And so Cite is not an end all be all, but it is, a vast improvement over showing zero context. And I think we think about that a lot. How can we improve these things? Can we show more context? Can we work with publishers to, again, show more context? What can be done here? And as AI advances, both generative AI, natural language processing, all these different things, it helps. It helps with the classification. It helps with the extraction. And, there's this saying by a famous investor that software is eating the world. I used to say it's eating the world except for the scholarly literature. But I think that is slowly, especially over time, going to change, right? Researchers or research publications are now making their content more available to tool builders, to other, groups, so that, the powerful AI applications can utilize research, because as much as research is written for humans, and as much as there is a push for OA for humans, Also, so was the push for machines to have access to analyze, extract, synthesize this new information. And I think that's some of the powerful things of AI is if you look at open databases where there's literature, or not literature, where there's data that you can use and apply to machines, you get very powerful technologies, right? And so protein database, that is a structured repository of protein structures where researchers contribute to it. Well, given all that, Google DeepMind has been able to develop very powerful prediction, using AI, right? Predicting structures, helping with drug development, et cetera. And so I think access, good data is very important, obviously, for the machines. And you know the saying, garbage in, garbage out. So we need to make sure we're supplying LLMs, we're supplying literature, we're working together to make sure it's not just all of the web, but it's also the valuable parts of the web, which are research articles, research data, and the like.
There was someone has a particular issue. So in some cases, why I don't get in-text citations when I ask a question in Cite Assistant, I only get numbers.
That just sounds like you can change it. So again, there are thousands of different reference styles and citation styles. If you go to assistant settings, you can change it from Harvard to MLA. And so you'll see numbers, or you'll see names, or IEEE's number. And so it's just a setting under assistant, and you can change that. Also, if you're asking assistant and you're not getting references, also in the settings is the ability to say, hey, give me references. Because in some cases, maybe you want to use assistant and you don't need references. Right? Again, you can ask it to give you a poem about chromosome missegregation, and it won't give it references. And if you ask it to give it references to support your poem, it will. And that's actually a use case I've done, which is pretty fun.
Next question is, if we are to compare Cite to any paper search engine, e.g. PubMed, can this tackle the issue of access to non-open articles?
Yeah, so again, we have, spent 6+ years getting very unique access to non-open articles, right? And so if you run a search, and you can obviously just do this, in Cite versus PubMed, we're generally going to show you more. We're also going to show you within the article. And so I didn't show the search interface, but you will not just do a search and get a bunch of titles, which is what most academic search databases look like. Even if there is full text search, it is still showing titles. And again, that relates to our right and license that we've worked with publishers to be able to show these excerpts. And so you can search chromosome missegregation and see within the full text, how is this being discussed? And that's unique to Cite because, again, you need the rights from publishers to be able to do that. You can't just show everything you want from publications.
Yeah, so yeah, you're able to get a lot of insights into non-open access articles without having access to them, but also helping you to decide whether you need to go and get access to the article.
Yep.
There's a question about, do LLMs have access to closed access articles? In general, no. So in general, the big LLMs produced by by OpenAI or Google Gemini or Anthropic's Claude do not have the rights to those closed articles. They are talking to publishers. There have been a few deals with some major publishers like Taylor & Francis and Wiley, but this seems to be quite a long process. So in general, they don't have access to them, and that is a key unique advantage of using Cite.
This is also something that, Research Solutions has historically provided access to the literature in the form of reading it via PDFs. We are also working on providing the ability to license and utilize this content on behalf of publishers. So again, we partner with publishers, and this is something Chris is leading, and I'm sure we'll have a webinar on at some point, to facilitate some of this access, because it shouldn't just be one group that has access, right? There are companies that are developing drugs, there are governments, there are a lot of different uses for research, and we need to work with publishers to broker that access, to control and make sure it makes sense, it's done ethically, it's done legally, et cetera. And so that's also a big focus of Research Solutions, which is something that Chris is leading directly.
All right, we're almost out of time. I think we addressed the question already about access to non-open access content. There's one little question. Please provide details on the play you mentioned. I think I missed that. Did you mention a play?
I don't think so, but now
I don't think so.
I wish I did.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah.
And the last question was really about what do you see as the biggest advantage of using Cite? I think talked a lot about that, but I don't know, maybe one
I think
last
it's the
word.
smart citations and again, the direct relationships that we have with publishers, right? You know, we didn't just plug into a Semantic Scholar, which, you know, is a great resource, but, you know, is missing many things, right? And so it takes a lot of work to develop relationships with publishers to make sure you secure these rights, you utilize in a way that they're comfortable with, and you provide value back to them. And so I think that is a big advantage is, again, our access, our smart citations, and then, you know, how we deploy that through useful user interfaces and experiences. So we also very much listen. Like if there's things you don't like, tell us, and we take that to heart, and we can make changes as well on it.
Awesome. Thank you
All
so much,
right.
both
Yeah,
of you,
go on.
for presenting today. There might be one or two questions. If we didn't get to them, I'll make sure to follow up with the right person here. So we make sure all of your questions are answered, but we do want to leave on time. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Chris and Josh, for presenting. This was incredible. And I really do hope to see most of you on the next one in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.